Hey, this is More Than Velocity podcast, and today it's Ryan and Jordan on here. Bart is out of town, but we have a guest, Alex Beebe, and he runs a facility and does a great job on a whole bunch of the return to throw programs, different aspects like that. And we're going to go ahead and turn it over to Alex to let him introduce himself, give a little bit of his background, and we'll go from there.
Jordan, I'm pumped to be on the podcast. I know we don't know each other very well, but I've loved your stuff. So I'm a physical therapist. I treat baseball players. Recently, in this past year, is when I opened up my own business called Diamond Performance and Rehab. I've been working in kind of the insurance-based PT field for a while, for about 10 years. I developed a good niche. It's been a huge blessing. It's been awesome. And within the insurance style setting, so I wear a lot of different hats. So I have the PT hat. I have the strength and conditioning specialist hat. I've played the game my whole life, and so I dig a lot into biomechanics and really tying in, since I've played the game and I have kind of the anatomy and biomechanical background, I really tie in feel with anatomy, and that's kind of how I would train it. But in the insurance setting, what we were finding is that we weren't having the leeway to really get these guys to the point to where we can go through the performance progression, go into the throwing progression, and then insurance is like, nope, this is too much fun. You can't see these guys anymore. And so it was just kind of like we couldn't really be with them to the return to throw. And personally, I feel like that's the biggest part of it, especially, the short 45, 60, 75, whatever kind of interval-based throwing program you're doing. That's the time to implement the best feel, because you don't want to be guessing or retraining yourself when you're throwing at 90, 120, 150. So I pretty much started my own company to give myself the space, the instruments to do it with, and the leeway to kind of transition them with myself and with guys that work with me, from the PT side through the performance side, through the biomechanics side, all the way up to when they're on the bump back at full speed. So that's kind of what I'm doing now, down in Atlanta, Georgia.
Yeah, and how did you get kind of turned on to the ArmCare platform? Where did it kind of pop onto your radar?
Awesome. I'm a huge nerd. I love numbers. I love data, and all the students, all the residents that I teach, it's always about have a reason for what you're doing, whether it's throwing, whether it's rehab, whether it's strength and conditioning. We get caught up in the cuteness of the social media world, or it's like, oh, I saw this exercise with 30 bands on it. Isn't this cool? And I'm like, why are you doing it? And if there's no reason to do it, then what are we doing? If we're losing the main focal point because we're doing something that's so cool looking and it's got so much pizzazz, then we've lost the rationale. And so I like the numbers, the metrics. I always like to have an objective criteria for doing what I'm doing. And I like open source pages. So I believe I probably came across it, social media, Instagram or something like that. I clicked on it. I'm like, this is pretty cool. And what I love about your page, it's got the numbers there. It's got the research there. It's not like, oh, buy our device and maybe you'll see what happens. It's like, here's our research. This is why we do what we do. And then you have, correlates to injuries. You have correlates with velocity. You have correlates with performance. And it's always just a cool thing to see, to say, that helps me sleep at night, to have something to support what I'm doing, objectively. That was the biggest thing right there. And that's why I reached out to you and I said, man, this is awesome. I love what you're doing. Let's team up, or tell me more about what you got going on and how can I implement it and what I'm doing.
Yeah, and then one thing I thought was pretty cool you mentioned was, they got all these things going on. Why are you doing that? Don't know. And one of the cool things when me and Ryan were working with the Angels together is we had this aspect where everybody always wanted to add a whole bunch of stuff. And it was kind of that same thing. Hey, I saw this on social media. I saw this on here. And one of the things that stuck with me that Ryan said was more is not better, better is better. And like you always use this term, Ryan, minimally viable product. And I'm probably butchering it, but do you mind going in on that MVP aspect?
Yeah, I mean, the main thing is, and that's why you have the dynamometer, is a lot of this stuff, at least for the upper body, you can determine what exercises are pushing the needle and how much. So, anytime you have a throwing athlete, especially depending on the season, you got this, kind of a sound mixer type of approach where you're dialing up throwing, let's just say, and you're dialing down training. So, when it comes to a minimally viable approach, or we call a minimally effective dose, we can be pretty specific about that, with looking at arm strength changes, especially at their fatigue. So, for example, the pitcher is throwing in season, he's not fatiguing, he's got no shoulder balances, but he's weak in a couple muscle areas. Hopefully, it's both IR and ER. That's when you have to crank it up. That's when the minimally effective dose isn't working. So that they're weak, you need to increase that strength level. And I also believe that variety is important because you do need neuroplasticity, but on the same
Yeah.
token, I do like, the to answer why you would be prescribing those things and also matching the exercise with someone who's technically sound. For example, I don't put 10-year-olds on their knees and tall kneeling when they have a hard time controlling it with a single arm, when they have a hard time controlling two arms standing, feet even, and they can't even handle a split stand. So got to be able to, dial in what is the right amount of challenge and, and figure out what is the baseline level that really moves the needle for strength. We call that minimally effective dose, but you could also say a minimally viable product to work off of.
Yeah, I knew I was going to butcher it somewhere. So yeah, that's minimally effective dose. That was the term. But real quick, Alex, if you don't mind, we kind of went over the backstory, how we got connected, different things like that. How are you using it with your athletes? What kind of sets you apart from everybody else in that area in terms of getting those guys back to throwing, number one, healthy, and number two, back to that previous performance and ideally a little bit better than where they were before getting hurt?
So what Ryan said was huge. That minimally viable dose. That's so big because I've learned from my career. It's been a career of learning from what helped and what hurt, right? That's kind of ultimately how you get better. And then I am very long-winded if we ever talk or email together, and that goes the same in my programs, to where it's kind of like I'm giving these guys a ton of stuff. I could cover every little piece of the puzzle, and the guys that do it ultimately stay healthy. But if 70% of the guys aren't doing it, because they look at it and they're like, holy smokes, if I treat guys from, 8th grade up to the professional level. And if I give that to an 8th grader and his job's not solely to take care of his body like a pro, he's not going to do that. And does that help anybody? And so it's like finding that starting point. That's where the magic is. And sometimes you have to sacrifice your pride to say, hey, I'm going to cut out what I know all the stuff that you could do, but it's like, what's going to help you out the most? And kind of finding that starting point is very special. But back to the question, there's my rabbit hole. The biggest thing is, kind of doing what I'm doing, setting apart. Whenever let's say if we're, in rehab, let's say a guy just came in after UCL repair, UCL reconstruction. We do kind of the base level PT. We obviously don't lose focus on the important topics first, get the elbow extension, get all that stuff going, regain motor contraction, motor control, neuroplasticity, neuromotor control at the elbow and the shoulder and the T-spine. But as we progress, we're building in the foundation because we can always have an ending point to say, I know I need you ready to tolerate a throw. If it's reconstruction, week 18 to 24. If it's repair, around that 12, 14 week mark. So we work backwards and we start setting goals based on that backwards selection. We start implementing a ton of core, a ton of hip. We start implementing, so we isolate the structures, retrain the structures, know how to move it. We start implementing functional movement patterns, and then we start getting a little bit more into the specifics of the movement pattern. So we integrate that. So by the time they touch baseball, they're not relearning how to ride the bike, if you will. It's kind of like they've been doing this for weeks, and now it's just, let's teach the brain to trust the arm to lay back. Going with that, when we hit into that, the thing kind of sets it apart, other than the rehab progression hitting what's needed to set the foundation for what they're needing to do, their end goal. With the PT setting, this is where I get, and it breaks my heart. Ironically, it's because it's a business and it's great to have new patients, but it breaks my heart. I get guys, this is about 40 to 50% of what I see. They get to the 90-foot phase of throwing. They have pain. They go back to the doctor. They check it out. And they're like, oh, your UCL is fine, or the labral repair is fine. You need to go see BB. And then they come in after the 90-foot phase, because they're planning on, returning to the mound in 6 to 8 weeks. And I'm like, holy smokes. Like you've been throwing wrong the whole time. As a PT, it's like you hit the strength parameters, your range of motion of your shoulder. Notice I just said shoulder is great. And then it's like the whole PT progression. We've forgotten that there's a human body attached to the arm, And so the biggest thing is I want to get guys getting the right things moving at the right time, sequencing it up to progress them back into throwing. But then I don't discharge them when they're done with PT. Then we kick it into the throwing gear. And so when we start throwing, we're making sure we're hitting the fundamentals, we're hitting the right movement patterns, and it's all feel. I don't tell someone where to go, what to do with their arm, or your elbow should be higher. That's not a thing. It's like the elbow goes into the position it's supposed to be in based on what the energy from the ground up does. But we make sure they're doing the right thing from the get-go, from the throwing program, so they're progressing their way up the right way. And to the overall question, how am I using the ArmCare device and the ArmCare programming? It's beautiful. So I have about, a 50 to 60 point screen that I do when they're clear, when they have medical clearance from the doctor. It says, oh, it's been 16 weeks, it's been 20 weeks. You have medical clearance. The UCL feels good. It's been 20 weeks. Start a throwing program. Then they come in all pumped up and they're like, oh, we're throwing today. And I'm like, well, if we've been doing the right things, you're going to pass this test and then we're going to start throwing. So then we do a medical screen. That's one aspect in which the ArmCare device comes in, right? Because my screen is going to look at movement pattern off the table. How is our RDL position? How's our lateral step down? What's our star excursion testing? Then we go, what's our T-spine mobility? What's our hip mobility? And I look at shoulder, obviously range of motion, one rep testing, which is going to be, the peak testing on the ArmCare score. So we go through the ArmCare score. Then I look at variables such as endurance. Can I do 60 reps in 60 seconds with a certain band type? I look at proprioception stabilization. I look at ball drop testing, scap positioning during endurance testing. And then we know that we're clear. And so one of the beautiful things about the ArmCare scores, we can have a baseline score. So it's like, we know you're here. You kind of pass the test so we can start throwing. But then as we go, and just like Ryan also said, we start ramping up throwing. This is rehab. This is season. This is everything. It's like we start ramping up throwing. Our training ramps down. But I also we're not the same person at preseason, midseason, in-season. We're all different people. And so I also have another screen, which is like a big in-season screen. Come in, let's do, that's going to be like a 30, 40 point screen I can do in 15 minutes to say, look at all these variables. This is what it's showing. And that's another big thing with the ArmCare. It gives me objective data, not something I'm just feeling with my hand and saying, because manual muscle testing really isn't a thing since polio. It doesn't really give us the best
what we
variables.
found with manual muscle testing was it varied from level to level and it varied day to day by the practitioner. So that was one of the reasons we got even more into the dynamometry. There's a million reasons why we got more into it, but the manual muscle testing was one of them. Sorry to cut you off.
Yeah, it's subjective, and it's good to have objective numbers, and it also gives someone a goal. It's like, you're at this number today, and they have something to work towards, not just me being like, that's kind of weak. It's like, it's just so subjective. And so, I get to use that and have objectivity with determining where their weak points are. And we can say for a fact the numbers are on the screen. And then adapting, because I love that y'all have, your recovery routine. You have advice on your volume should be this day, or ramp it up, or back it off, or change up your recovery routine because it's not showing that you're recovering. And so that's beautiful. And so that way we can tie all this stuff in together and give them the most appropriate thing based on individually what they look like versus this is my program for everyone.
And that's the big thing there. You said individual. So one of the things Ryan and I have had the blessing and the curse of doing is working probably with some of the most injured athletes any organization has seen. As for a while we were leading the MLB, so we found out what did work, what didn't work. And one of the things that we were finding, and tell me if you've seen something completely different, but our guys who are checking those boxes on arm score, SVR, shoulder balance, recovery, the fatigue metrics, different things like that, all the things we put into that ArmCare system, in that, we could add more reps in, but it comes into that minimally effective dose. These are what we found. Those guys who are coming back from injury, they generally don't have the setbacks in their throwing programs. They generally start relearning that skill a lot quicker. They generally get back into competition a little bit faster, and things just progress a little easier for them. There's not as many speed bumps they have to go over. It's more like they're driving down
Yeah.
or skiing down the nice, easy groom slope as opposed to going down the moguls. So, would you agree with that, Ryan, or would you say you've seen something different? And then, Alex, what's your take on that?
No, I've seen the same thing. I mean, like just kind of dovetailing on what you said, we had a lot of injured players to investigate, and it was a little bit challenging at the beginning in the sense that protocols seem to predominate in rehabilitation,
Yeah.
and evidence-based practice, although it's read in research, is not translating to the real world as far as practice-based evidence. For example, using pain and time as your indicators of when a player is ready for progression. So, the thing is that I'm hearing too is just being evidence-led by using the ArmCare data to form your progressions, and every athlete, and what we learned in the injury side of things, they respond to exercise differently. And you can actually create imbalances in a rehabilitation process if you're not testing, because certain athletes have a neurological wiring to certain muscle groups.
Mhm.
And so, you have to alter these things constantly and be dynamic, I think, to be highly successful and avoid secondary injuries or consequent injuries that are in other areas as a result of lack of practice-based evidence.
Yeah, I think that kind of ties it all together pretty well. And we're obviously running a little bit low on time, but Alex, you got any closing thoughts? Where can people find you? What's the best way to get a hold of you?
First off, I just want to say, Ryan, you're on fire today. You were saying great stuff, dude. That's so true. And that's why I started the one-on-one practice, because it's individualized. You got to test. Because we don't know if our rotator cuff is shut down. It's my job. I couldn't tell you if my rotator cuff is shut down right now. We change over time as we throw. So continue to test, retest that, guys. It's evidence-led, like you said. That's beautiful. It's been an honor, a blessing to be on the show. I appreciate, letting me come on and talk. I'm over right now. I'm in Decatur, Georgia. Opening up shop in Marietta soon, and it's called Diamond Performance and Rehab. And Jordan, what I do want to talk to you about at some point, I know we're running low on time, but I'm putting together our velocity program right now just to keep everything in house, because there's so many places doing these velo programs, and it's not individualized. It's 20 guys throwing driveline drills against the wall, which there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but it's not there's no individuality.
Yeah.
People are getting hurt. They come back in the clinic, and for example, I have 3 UCL tears right now. I'm like, what is going on? And so I'd rather kind of there's got to be a better evidence way to do it. There's got to be a better progressive way to do it. I want to start using the ArmCare to incorporate that into what's the appropriateness to start a velo program? What's the appropriateness to, how do we add on volume? And how do I get, people are paying big money for their kids to be throwing with 30 other kids. There's got to be a better way.
Yeah, we have on a side note, we have our checklist, our checkpoints of what's going to qualify you. You guys can find that on our website. And then we also just released our course on velocity program monitoring and adjustment. I think I said the whole word of it there correctly. I'm probably screwing that up as well. But, me and Ryan, again, blessing and a curse, we've done way more velo programs, whether it's Driveline, NPA, Wolfworth, whichever one you want to use. There's no wrong and there's no right programs. There's just a good one for you. And it's really important to individualize those. But you just reminded me, it's a good time to mention that we actually have that course available now. It's been a question we've been getting. You can get on there and sign up for it and be ready to go. But make sure you check out Alex, and we will see you guys next time on the next More Than Velocity.